What was your childhood like?
My childhood. I was born in Washington, D.C., which is a place you folks are going to visit later this year or next year. This year. When do you go? That's next year. Okay. No, you're right. Anyway, Washington, D.C., which I think you're going to find is an exciting city. I grew up in a town of 600 people, midway between Washington and Annapolis, Maryland. Annapolis is where the Naval Academy is. And pretty normal life. I was born in 1936 and spent most of my years, comparable to your years, during World War II, and that's how I grew up.
Could you please say and spell your name?
Sure. First name is Hank. Actually, my first name is Henry, but my mother called me Henry. Everybody else calls me Hank. Last name is Bagelmann. It's B as in Baker, Agelmann.
What was your reasoning behind serving? Please explain the process and why did you choose that branch of military if you enlisted?
Yeah. I grew up in a time when the whole idea of service to country was important, and I had the good fortune of having a teacher when I was a senior in high school who had been a pilot during the war in the Pacific. And what he helped me understand, and quite a few of my classmates, is that you have an obligation to country, that freedom is not free. And at that time, there was a military draft in place. I was a wrestler. I was in very good shape, and I knew that I would certainly be called up in the draft. So he said, well, why don't you take charge of that and join a reserve unit while you're in high school, and you can begin to work off some of that 8-year obligation that you'll have for military service. And I did. I joined the Army in November of 1953, finished high school, and then took active duty, going through the basic training and the rest of it. My first assignment was as a military policeman at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and went from there to Fort Knox to do my basic training. That's probably enough. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
What was your training like?
Training was a wake-up call. I went from being a boy, a young man, to being somebody who knew more than a person at that age ought to have. I was 17 years old, and the things that I learned to do were things that were to protect me, to help me learn discipline, to help me learn that I had a part in it, and that there was a whole chain of command that you had to learn. My dad had told me that you're going to have a lot of tests. And he said, you want to do the very best you can, because some people like to test down so that they don't get assigned to things that they don't necessarily want. And I took my dad's advice, and when I finished my basic training, I had some really good choices of things that I could do within the military, and I chose going to Fort Riley, Kansas, to become an intelligence analyst.
Could you please explain what an intelligence
Analyst is? Yeah. There were 300 of us, 300 plus of us who went, not 300, there were 100 of us who went to that particular school. It was an extended school. Most units in the military are 8 weeks, and we were there, I think, 12 weeks. And I learned a lot about photo interpretation, how to do, to make assessments of things that were happening on the ground, mostly from photographic evidence. And when we finished the coursework, there were 30 of us who graduated. So it was pretty rigorous training, great training, things I've been able to use literally all through my life. I went from there, from Fort Riley, to Germany, and I served with the occupation forces in Germany. I went to 7th Army headquarters and did a combination of things, a lot of photo interpretation, a lot of coding work, putting things into code, transmitting those things, and some courier duty. And I guess the part of it that was most interesting was to do, they called it TINE, Troop Information and Training. And that's to help the people that were soldiers in the field keep their skills updated, and also to be careful about how they disseminated information.
What was it like to serve in Germany?
It was a different time. We were occupying forces then. About half a year into that, the German occupation ended, and we were no longer, they were no longer just occupied Germany. They became the West German Federal Republic. That would have been on May the 5th of 1955. It's a great date to remember because it's 5/5/55. And as you get older, remembering things like that becomes more and more difficult. But May the 5th, 1955, the Germans became an independent, West Germany became an independent nation. We remained, the occupation force remained there and worked hand in hand with the new German government.
What emotions did you have going through your head while you were there?
A lot of pride. A lot of pride in being an American. The work that we were doing with German nationals was respectful on both sides. There were still vestiges of the Nazi presence. It's something that doesn't just go away when you've lived with it for many, many years. But we found ourselves we worked together. We processed thousands of refugees, people from Hungary, people from Czechoslovakia who were escaping from the Russian zone and coming into the Allied zones. We worked together with the French, the English, and of course, the U.S.
What was it like when you came home? What did you decide that you wanted to do while you were in the service?
That was tough. I had matriculated at the University of Maryland when I was stationed at 7th Army headquarters. They had a branch there. The fact is, they had branches in every military post in the world where the GIs who were stationed there could take coursework to begin work on their degrees. I came back and I decided I wanted to go into the Foreign Service. And I'd worked a summer for the YMCA, fell in love with the YMCA, and decided I didn't want to go work in the Foreign Service. I'd really rather work with the YMCA.
Tell us a
I started out on a mop and plunger crew. That means we cleaned cabins, we cleaned bathrooms, we mowed lawns, we did all of those things. And there was just a good spirit about it. When I graduated from college, I decided that, I had an internship with the recreation department, took a full-time job with them, and less than a year later, was called by a YMCA to see if I wanted to join their staff team, and did. And the work was mostly working with young people. We had one of the largest teenage youth programs in the country where I worked. Later went to Scranton, Pennsylvania as the CEO, back to Washington, D.C., my hometown, had a branch there, and then became director of operations. Went to San Francisco from there. I couldn't keep a job, so I went from there to Berkeley, California, the People's Republic of Berkeley, as the CEO, and then was asked to join the national staff as the national field director.
If someone were to write your legacy 100 years from now, what would you want them to write about?
That he was a good person. Not perfect, not any of those things, but a good person.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I brought a couple of things for you folks to just see. I don't know whether they're... This is a picture of me next to my Jeep, and this is a courier run that went from Stuttgart to Munich to Nuremberg and up to Frankfurt. And what we were doing is we were carrying classified documents and that. During the time I was in Germany, I was always armed, and we were not to be intercepted. Put that there, you can look at it later. These are patches from my uniforms. This is when I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that's the 3rd Armored Division. In Germany, this is 7th Army. I was at the station, as I told you, at 7th Army headquarters. And this is the shape, that's the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers in Europe, and they were based in Heidelberg, Germany. This is a ribbon. You get ribbons that you can put on your uniform. I'll show you those. But this is for German occupation, and it's the colors of the German flag, and a little thing with... I'll leave these here so that you can take a look at them. And let's see. Yeah, this says I'm an expert rifleman. Everybody goes to basic training really learns how to fall in love with their rifle. And you take very good care of your rifle. And then finally, these are the service ribbons, and you'll see there are lots of men and women that have a whole chest full of these. I've got 3. One is National Service. This one is German Occupation, and this is Good Conduct. I think that's everything I brought.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's good to meet you. I think about the fact that I was, how old are most of you?
11.
Okay, so 6 years older than you are is when I started that particular journey. And I just wish all of you well. It's you've got a great time ahead of you. I hope you have a great time in Washington, D.C.